I got the offer in a windowless conference room 7 floors above 6th Avenue, where the air smelled faintly of dry erase marker and citrus cleaner, and the projector whirred like an anxious insect. The consultant's deck was 57 slides long, and while she walked us through the hockey sticks and double-digit growth projections, my phone lit up on the table with a text from my son. "Can I stay at Mom's Saturday? Got practice." I typed sure, and waited for the bubbles, but there were none. The slide advanced to a chart that measured synergy potential in shades of mint and blood orange, and the chair of the board tilted toward me and said, "Daniel, it doesn't get clearer than this. They want you." I'd been on a path so straight it could have been a laser analyst, associate VP, managing director, then COO at a firm with an elevator bank so polished you could fix your tie in the reflection. The offer on the table would make me CEO of a global logistics company that moved everything from vaccines to avocados. The salary number sat heavy in the envelope like a bar of gold. The bonus promised private school tuition 10 times over, and the equity cliff was a horizon I could stroll toward for the next 5 years of my life. "Congratulations," said the chair. A woman with a platinum watch and a voice like velvet over steel. The HR lead smiled as if practice had taught her the exact right angle to say we're thrilled. Someone brought in cookies I didn't touch. It was late afternoon, and office light flattened the sky to a dull pain. A helicopter traced a tired oval over Midtown. When I stood to leave, they told me the deadline was a week from tonight. "We want you enthusiastic," the chair said. "Take your time. Reflect. I have learned that the world loves a story of ascent. We want the mountain, the summit, the selfie with the sky at our feet. If you stopped me in the lobby that day and asked if I was happy, I would have answered the way an athlete smiles with a broken rib. Of course. Then I would have counted my breaths until the elevator reached the ground. The sidewalk held its October chill. An ambulance yawned its siren and threaded through a line of black cars outside the hotel across the street. Somewhere above me, a window thunked shut. I started walking without thinking. Past the newsstand where the vendor still recognized me after 15 years. Past the deli where a guy named Kevin always slipped me an extra pickle with my turkey on rye. I stood in Bryant Park and watched a boy chase pigeons while his mother scrolled her phone. When the boy laughed, his whole body shook like a small bell. I called my son. "Hey," he said cautiously, as if I were a number that sometimes meant a problem. "Got your text. Practice. Huh?" "Yeah," he said. His voice had deepened in the past year, so that sometimes a stranger answered my calls and then I realized the stranger was my kid. "We're doing percussion ensemble now." "Oh wow," I said. "That's new." "Yeah." There was rustling on the other end. I pictured him at his mother's kitchen table with a homework packet wide open and his phone propped against a glass of milk. "I got to go," he added. "Right? Sure. Hey Jonah?" "Yeah. I might have some news." Silence. He waited politely. I could hear the kettle at his mother's place begin to sing, the little old whistle with the dent in it from the time I dropped it moving out. "Let me call you later," I said. "It's good news." "Okay," he said, and then he was gone. I used to play piano. It's a sentence I hadn't allowed myself in years. It felt like smuggling a precious piece of contraband through a border of my own making. There was a time when my weekends were a ladder of rehearsals. Practice rooms with scuffed floors and wooden benches. Clubs where old men told me to relax my wrists, to let the hand fall like rain. That time lived in a box under my bed, in the shape of a battered metronome and a small stack of hand-notated charts. It lived in the scrape of the apartment's upright that I sold when we needed space for a crib. When I got home that night, I set the envelope with the offer beside the fruit bowl. The apartment was clean in a way that suggested absence. My housekeeper had lined up the shoes by the door. My suits hung like obedient soldiers in their dedicated half of the closet. On the refrigerator was a printout of Jonah's school calendar, magnets holding it at the corners. Parent-teacher conferences next month, winter concert in December, a note about college night that made my heart stumble because it meant time was approaching at a speed I had not counted on. I took the envelope to the living room and ripped it open. Numbers like a stadium scoreboard. Benefits like a wish list. It wasn't the money that knocked the wind out of me. It was the calendar, the travel, the expectation of availability that was almost monastic. At the altar of need, you kneel. The chair's voice returned to me from that room without windows. Enthusiastic. Take your time. There's a question people used to ask me when they learned I had a kid. How do you do it? I'd smile and quote some efficient nonsense about scheduling, priorities, how I always made it to the big games. It was almost true. I did make it to the big games. I just missed the practices. The small, unphotographed hours when a kid learns to hit a note and you're the only witness. I thought I would catch the next one and then the next. I lived as if next were a guarantee. I poured a glass of water and sat on the couch and looked at my own reflection in the black screen of the TV. It's possible to dislike, at 46, the face of the person who became you and still be proud of him. The past is not a corridor you can rewalk. It's a stack of closed rooms. But sometimes, if you press your ear against the door, you can hear the piano. I slept with the envelope under the lamp. Monday. I showed up to work with the kind of energy that gets mistaken for good cheer. The COO role trains you to performance-level composure. Your heartbeat is an HR issue you keep to yourself. I moved meetings. I cut through a crisis that had been bloating for weeks, told 2 directors to swap teams like chess pieces, sent a note to legal that translated a novel into bullet points. At noon, I stood at the window and watched a line of yellow cabs like a river in slow motion and told myself the week was a simple math problem. 7 days. One choice. Fix what I could. I texted Jonah to ask if he wanted ramen after his practice. He responded with the slow, careful yes of a teenager who assumes this plan might collapse. I wrote, 6:30, Tato, 52nd? He sent a thumbs up. The small spike of happiness I felt embarrassed me. At 5:30, a client called with an urgent that was 1 part substance to 10 parts anxiety. By 6, the percentage had not improved. I listened and soothed and rearranged 2 teams' priorities, thought about the way Jonah liked his egg half done, the way he chopped the scallions into neat, almost perfect coins the one time he helped me cook. At 6:10, with a tight apology, I texted, running 10 to 15 late. Order an appetizer? The dots appeared, disappeared. I put the client on hold. The dots returned. Okay. I arrived at 6:50 and he was a careful statue in a corner booth, drumsticks protruding from the pocket of his jacket like a pair of antennae. He was taller than me now if he stood straight, but he hadn't learned to stand straight yet. His shoulders sloped as if he were always guarding himself from rain. Sorry, I said, and it barely deserved to be said. The room smelled like sesame and broth. The waitress appeared, and we ordered without looking at the menu, as we had done enough times that it counted as tradition. How's ensemble? I asked. He shrugged. Good. What are you guys playing? Some stuff. He looked down. When he was a child, his expressions were dramatic, delight, anger, grief, like weather fronts sweeping a small country. Now everything was weather underground. If you wanted to know, you had to dig. Okay, I said lightly. Stuff is good. He smirked in spite of himself. I told him about the Mets game I almost attended and didn't, because I was older now and even joy required persuasion. He told me about a teacher who said he mumbled when he read aloud and how he went home and read a comic book to the dog just to make the dog tilt its head. We laughed in the way that felt like agreement. Yes, we can still find this. When the bowls arrived, steaming and generous, I said, I got an offer. He set his chopsticks down, slowly. For what? For a different job. A bigger job. How big? Big enough that I don't know whether to be proud or ashamed. He snorted. That's a weird answer. True. Is it, here? In New York, I said. But a lot of out there. I made a useless shape in the air with my hand. Travel. Calls. Time. He looked at his bowl and then at me. Do you want it? I thought about lying. Not a lie. A polite answer that turned the volume down on my desire. I want it less, I said. He smiled at that. There's a deadline, I added. A week from now. He nodded as if that were the weather. Okay. I wanted him to ask me not to take it. I wanted the simplicity of a prohibition, the way a child says no, don't go, and then you can say you promised someone. But he was a teenager. His oppositions were private and often irrelevant to my schedule. He took a scoop of noodles and said, "You always pick good restaurants. Your mother says I bribe you with food. You do." He slurped. "But I also like you." The relief that flooded me felt juvenile, too powerful for what it was. After dinner, he checked the time and said he had to study. He stood, backpack heavy on one shoulder, drumsticks tapping a small rhythm against his thigh. When we hugged, he kept one arm across his chest, a half-hug that acknowledged embarrassing public displays. He walked away with a gait that was only just becoming his longer stride, a sense of experimenting with the world's space. On my walk home, I passed a bar with live jazz. The sign said, "Sit in Mondays." I stood outside long enough to feel foolish and then stepped in anyway, because the door was open and some doors are instructions. It was a small room with brick walls and an old Yamaha in the corner that had seen better fingers. A trio of kids, new school maybe, were playing, and the pianist had that mix of fear and arrogance that meant he'd be good if and when life knocked a little varnish off him. I took a table under a photograph of an old man whose name was probably in my bones somewhere. When the MC asked if anyone wanted to sit in, my hand rose before my better self could veto it. I moved through the crowd and sat at a piano I had not earned. The keys were slightly out of tune in the way that makes truth a little bitter and therefore more interesting. I took a breath I hadn't taken in years and looked at the drummer, a young woman with a friendly concentration. "Round midnight?" I asked, and she grinned. I was not the player I had been, but my hands remembered the shape of absence and how to turn it into sound. The room made that murmur that's a vote. The bartender stopped wiping a glass. After a minute, the notes began to stitch themselves together into something like confidence. I played past expectation and into something that felt like permission. When it was over, the applause was the size of the room and therefore perfect. The drummer leaned in and said, "You coming back?" I said, "I've got a week." She laughed as if I'd told a joke. Tuesday. At work, the offer hung in the air like weather. People aren't stupid. They smell a coming storm in emails that arrive at odd hours and meetings just to touch base. The CEO, a man who wore serenity like an expensive coat, pulled me into his office and said he'd heard rumblings. He refilled my water from a carafe as if hydration were the only human hunger, and said he'd be sorry to lose me but happy for me if this was what I wanted. I thanked him in the gentle, professional way that avoids saying the wrong true thing to the wrong audience. I left early and took the Q to Brooklyn because I had a plan that embarrassed me. There is nothing more middle-aged than a plan to surprise your teenage son at a thing. The auditorium at his high school still smelled like every auditorium I've been in, varnish and dust, and I slid into a seat near the back. The program was a white sheet folded twice. Percussion ensemble. When Jonah walked onto the stage, second from the left, he scanned the audience the way performers do when they tell themselves they're not scanning for anyone in particular. He didn't see me. He didn't expect to. They began with a piece that sounded like a rainstorm arranged by a mathematician. Sticks on blocks, mallets on marimba, a small sea of syncopations. Jonah's face changed when he played. It shed everything he'd picked up to survive the day and kept only the part that loved the pattern underneath noise. I realized, with a suddenness that made me grip the seat, that I'd seen this expression before, on a child beating a wooden spoon against a pot with more purpose than the law allowed, on a toddler who could make rhythm out of a faucet or a swarm of bees. The piece ended to good applause. The next piece began with a solo on a snare, and those few measures belonged to my son and the air he cut with his sticks as if air were a fabric you could make a suit out of. Afterward, this being a high school, 27 different people had to talk into a microphone. I waited in the lobby with parents who smelled like warmth and laundry. When Jonah emerged with his friends, he was mid-story, laughing in a way I didn't see often. He saw me then like you see a famous person from across the room. Surprise moved across his face like a shadow. If he was pleased, he hid it. He walked over without waving. We stood in the way of the swing of a door, and someone's elbow brushed me in passing. "You came," he said. "I wanted to. You didn't tell me. I wanted to surprise you." He shifted his bag. His friends lingered nearby, pretending not to listen. He said, "I have to get back to Mom's. Can I walk you?" He shrugged, which in our language meant yes. Outside, the evening was one of those New York evenings that makes the city look like a postcard of itself. The sky was a bruise fading to blue. We walked down the block, and I tried small talk that was not insulting. He did not offer any extra words. We reached the corner where I would either turn toward the subway or keep walking an extra 6 blocks for which I did not have a good reason. I said, "You were great." He stared at a gum stain on the sidewalk as if it were a complicated map. "Thanks," he said. "Then why now?" "What? You never come to these. You say you're going to come and then you don't. Why this one?" The truth had not yet been filtered for kindness. "Because I missed too many," I said. "That's," he said, then stopped. There was a sharpened look to him I hadn't noticed before. "I got to go," he said, and then softer, "Thanks for coming." He didn't hug me. He didn't need to. He walked away with a pace I recognized. The one you use when you're trying not to make a decision look like a decision. I took the cue back into the city and sat in the quiet car, eyes closed, listening to a boy 2 rows ahead practice paradiddles on his knees with pencils. I thought about the word fix. It's such an American word: act, make, do, repair. It assumes a broken thing is willing. It assumes you are not. Wednesday. There are days when the office becomes a ship in bad weather. People lean when they talk to you. They brace. A supplier in Hanoi had misinterpreted a clause and a ship sat, loaded, steaming at anchor while our lawyers rewrote reality. The sense of my profession was suddenly precise. We moved what people needed or wanted from where it was to where it wasn't, and the entire city was a system designed to forget how that worked. At lunch, I stared at a photograph on my desk that I had trained myself not to see. It was Jonah at 6, in pajamas with robots on them, asleep on the couch with his cheek pressed against my lap. In the background, half-cut limes and a shaker. A party that had left too late. Adults who refused to admit tired. The tenderness in the shot was a surprise even then, more than a decade ago. I had let my friend take it because I believed memory was the kind of problem you could solve with documentation. You could not. I called my ex-wife. "I went to Jonah's concert last night." She laughed, not unkindly. "Sit down," she said. "We're breaking out champagne." "I'm trying," I said. "I know." She was quiet long enough for me to recognize the sound of our old apartment. A balancing hum, the slow drip coffee maker, the window the wind liked. "He's been withdrawn. He's not angry at you, Dan. He's just building his life so he doesn't need you to show up for it. That's a way to survive." I hate that sentence. Me too. We had not failed at our marriage so much as refused to do the maintenance that might have saved it. Our divorce had been a series of negotiated truces, with Jonah caught in the careful air between our good intentions and our poor execution. She had remarried a teacher who liked camping and could fix a dishwasher solo. Their apartment had plants that thrived. I had an espresso machine that was almost a personality. "I got an offer," I said. "I figured. It's a lot. I assumed." "Do you have any advice?" I asked, and we both laughed at the idea. "Make a decision you won't resent the rest of us for," she said. It was the best counsel I got all week. That night, I met Jonah at a practice space in Williamsburg. It was one of those rooms you rent by the hour. Foam on the walls, a relic of a couch, a fan that rattled in an endearing way. I had reserved a keyboard. He arrived with a backpack that clinked gently with sticks. "What's this?" he asked. "I want you to show me what you're working on," I said, and I heard the overbright tone of a father who buys a skateboard. He hesitated in the doorway. "You don't have to," I added. He moved past me with a muttered "okay," as if granting me a favor and also himself something he could deny later. He set up behind the kit, adjusted the stool, counted off, and demonstrated a piece that required an independence between hands I envied. I sat at the keyboard and did not play. I watched his shoulders relax when the beat set, the small tilt of the head that signaled a groove he trusted. After a minute, he looked up through his bangs and said, "You going to sit there like a plant?" I laughed, a little too loud. "Can I try to follow?" He shrugged, which meant why not. I played a left hand that found its way to a simple progression. then built a right hand that refused to be obedient until it began to obey. He slowed so I could catch him. I sped so he would not lose interest. For a few minutes we played the correct game, the one in which you do not fix someone else's playing so much as adjust your own to meet it. When we stopped, the silence felt like a compliment. "You can play," he said, surprise as sharp as a new drumstick. "I used to," I said. "How used to?" "Before you. Before the spreadsheets." I grinned so he'd know I was not making the case that my child ruined my art. "A long time ago." "You never told me that." "Didn't I?" "No." His face did a thing that was almost anger and almost wonder. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I forgot I could be anyone else. Because competence is a drug that makes you give up every other drug. Because some rooms in my past were locked so I wouldn't wander into them when it was time to make rent." "I don't know," I said, and then braver. "Because it hurt to remember." We played again. Sloppy, uneven, occasionally beautiful. At the end of the hour, I booked Friday. "If you want," I said, watching the door swing open and inhale the hallway noise. "Okay," he said, and it was not a shrug. It was a real word. Thursday. The firm preaches balance but rewards sacrifice. There's no point blaming a machine for doing what it was built to do. I left at 5 with the same feeling you get when you walk out of a movie that carried you somewhere and then dropped you in daylight. Home doesn't make sense yet. I stopped at a record store on Houston and asked a kid with a mesh cap if they had the Bill Evans Riverside recordings. He nodded as if I had asked for something urgent and essential and brought me an almost new copy of a reissue with liner notes that would make me cry. I bought Jonah earbuds that were nicer than he needed and a pizza that wasn't. At home, I opened the piano I didn't have by setting the keyboard on my dining table and plugging it into a small amp I had purchased without fully admitting I was backsliding. I played scales until the room had boundaries again. I played My Foolish Heart because I wanted to commit to a cliché rather than pretend I wasn't one. I played the progression I had started in the practice space and wrote it down on a piece of paper like a person who meant to return to it. When I stopped, I realized my jaw hurt from clenching. There is a posture you hold when you're always preparing to defend yourself. It works in boardrooms. It doesn't work with sons. Friday, at 9 a.m., my assistant let in the recruiter with the easy smile of a man who vacations on islands with one runway. He shook my hand and said, "So?" with the bright expectancy of a waiter who knows your order already. I said I was still thinking, and he chided me in a way that was meant to be charming. "These trains leave on time," he said, which had the effect on me of making me want to walk. "We need an enthusiastic yes." The word enthusiastic haunted me like a refrain from a song I didn't choose. After lunch, I wrote an email to the chair asking for 48 hours beyond the deadline and then deleted it because I could hear her answer and it was no. At 3, the current CEO stuck his head in and said, "Are you going to the thing tonight?" "What thing?" He raised an eyebrow that communicated everything he thought about my priorities. "The fundraiser. The one your department underwrote." The thing was at a hotel with chandeliers that accommodated birds, if birds were rich. I was supposed to say a few words about the importance of logistics to the harp-like flow of New York life. Instead, I wrote to Jonah, "Practice at 7?" He wrote back, "Yeah." Then a beat later, "I told Mom I'm at Gabe's. Don't narc." I laughed out loud and someone in the hall looked alarmed. We met at the practice space and played autumn mistakes, as Jonah called them, for 2 hours. On the way out, I asked if he was hungry, and he said yes with such naked hunger that I threw my plan to the wind and took him to a place that required a shirt I wasn't wearing. At the host stand, I had a moment where the boy beside me and the man in me squared off, and I said to the host, "We're celebrating." He saw the shape of money in the air and replied with the shape of welcome. We sat at a small table and shared a steak frites that tasted like a reward in a movie. Jonah dipped each fry as if auditioning it for a role. "You're weird tonight," he said. "I'm happy." "Why?" "Because I like playing with you." The waiter poured water with a flourish I couldn't parse for sarcasm. Jonah set his fry down. "Are you going to take that job?" "I don't know." "You always know." "That's not true." He smirked. "Okay. But you act like you do. I stared at the condensation around my glass. I'm trying to choose a life that doesn't make me a liar. Whoa, he said, as if I'd said something profound or deeply stupid. We finished dinner and stepped into a night that had decided to be bright on our behalf. We walked without a plan through streets that always felt like possibilities dressed as concrete. And when we reached a small club with a stickered door, a sign said, "Piano Night." We went in. The bartender put a soda in front of Jonah on the house, and after a trio did an original that was better than its title, the MC asked for sit-ins. My son looked at me with a dare. Go. What if I'm terrible? I asked. Then I'll laugh and pretend I don't know you. I went. The drummer was the woman from Monday. She recognized me with a nod that was cooler than greeting. I took my place and the MC said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Turn out the stars. Because some nights you are not afraid of the wound." I began to play, and after a minute, I felt someone join me at the drums. Then, to my right, a soft addition, the tapping of 2 sticks on a rim with a patience that sounded like rain after a long drought. Jonah had walked to the bandstand and taken up a pair of brushes as if he were born with them. He watched me with an attention that might have broken me if I had noticed it entirely. We played not as father and son, but as 2 people trying to keep time for each other. We ended quiet, and the applause was an intimacy that felt larger than the room. Jonah sat down with me at the table, silent, like a diver who's resurfaced and is listening to new air. He took his soda, smiled into it and said, "That was not bad. High praise," I said. He bumped my shoulder with his, "It was good." We walked to the subway with the slow urgency of people who don't want to turn back into what they were before. At the stairs, he said, "Are you going to say no?" I looked down into the tunnel as if it held an answer. "I'm going to say not like this." He nodded, as if he could accept an intention if not a decision. Saturday. The city was washed clean by an early rain. I picked up Jonah at 10 with the promise of errands, which is the kind of promise teenagers hate. "Trust me," I said anyway. We drove over the Williamsburg Bridge because it felt cinematic, and I put on a playlist of the songs my father had played on Saturdays when he cleaned the kitchen, Chet Baker, A Little Ella, crackly even on the nicest speakers. We stopped at a piano showroom where the salesperson had the solemnity of a priest. I told him our budget, which was not small, and he nodded as if that was something we had confessed. Jonah trailed his fingers over the polished lids, making no sound. I sat at a mid-tier upright and played the progression I had written Wednesday, and the salesman smiled as if music made him a witness and therefore necessary. We bought a used kawaii that had the exact right weight to the keys like intention. "Are you crazy?" Jonah asked in the car, his voice tinged with wonder and panic. "Mom is going to, I don't know. She's going to be weird." "I talked to her last night," I said. "She said yes." "She did. She said she wished I'd done it earlier." He looked out the window at the city being itself. "Same," he said. We set up the piano in my apartment in the most inconvenient place, against a wall that had previously displayed an enormous photograph of a harbor at dawn that a client had given me when I closed a deal. The client's harbor went into the hall. The piano made the living room feel like a choice. We spent the afternoon arranging. Jonah showed me how to make a better bass line even though I'd played before he was born, because music obeys the person in the room who loves it most in that moment. We ordered dumplings and ate them standing up. I forgot to check my email for 5 hours and nothing caught fire. At 6, I opened my laptop and faced it like a person approaching a cliff to look for a path down. The recruiter had written, "Just checking in, and we're all very excited to have you on board," which was a sentence that had the indecency to be past tense. The chair had written, "We look forward to an enthusiastic yes." My finger hovered over reply. I wrote, "I am grateful. I am also asking for a weekend to consider, truly consider, the shape of what this role would make of me." I deleted it. I wrote, "I have a condition." I deleted that too because it was the wrong word, like a threat. Finally I wrote, "I would like to accept only if we can agree on the boundaries that keep me whole. If that's impossible, I need to be brave enough to say no." I stared at the blinking cursor until it felt like hypnosis. "Hey," Jonah said from the piano. He was threading a rhythm through the right hand I had been trying to write. "Play that again." I closed the laptop without hitting send. "Okay," I said and played. Sunday. Sunday mornings are always a little dishonest in New York, borrowed from a smaller town where people know the names of their neighbors' dogs. The city puts on its quiet the way a man puts on a sweater, self-conscious but committed. I made pancakes and burned the first one so that the others would understand the standard. We ate with our knees touching the coffee table. Jonah checked a homework assignment on his phone and then threw the phone face down as if it had insulted him. The piano, just standing there, made the room feel like a rehearsal. Like any moment, we might become the people inside a story we would want to tell. At noon, my phone lit up with the recruiter's name, then the chair's. I let both calls go to voicemail and then, after a minute, I listened. The recruiter had the forced ease of a man who expected compliance. "Hey, buddy, just need to hear that yes." The chair was polite and direct. "We would be disappointed to lose you, but not so much we would change our terms," is what she did not say but did. She reminded me of the timeline. She reminded me of the board's meeting on Monday, the press release drafted, the internal memo written. "We want the right person," she said, and it sounded like the wrong sentence. In the afternoon, Jonah and I walked in Central Park because that is what you do when you are trying on a life. We watched a man sail a toy boat with the seriousness of a surgeon. We watched a girl tell a story to her father with so much energy that he had to walk backward to face her. We sat on a bench and listened to a saxophonist near Bethesda Terrace play a song that was older than either of us but felt like it was being invented. Jonah said, in a voice he pretended was casual, "If you take this job, will we still do this?" "Yes," I said too quickly, then slowed. "Maybe. Less. I don't know." He nodded, generous in defeat because children often are. He threw a small stick the way you test a stream for current. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to play," he said simply. Then he squinted at me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to be the guy who doesn't need a calendar invite to hear you practice." He laughed. "That's a weird way to say father." We went home and played until our hands ached. The piece we wrote was 7 minutes long and had no name. It was me asking him a question and him refusing to answer and then answering in a way that made me grateful he had refused. At 9, with Jonah asleep on the couch, a textbook like a fallen roof over his chest, I opened my laptop and wrote the letter I had been afraid to write. It did not contain a demand. It did not contain a threat. It was a confession and an invitation. "Thank you for the offer," I wrote. "It honors me. I know the work and could do it well. I also know myself well enough to recognize that the role, as currently described, would absorb me entirely. That might have been acceptable to me 5 years ago. It is not now. I am therefore declining, unless we can reimagine the job in a way that honors both the company's needs and my human life. This would include a firm cap on travel days per month, a protected Sabbath, a day each week that is truly off-limits, a delegation structure that makes me redundant in all but crisis, and the recognition that I will leave at 6 p.m. on Wednesdays because my son has practice and I want to hear him play. If that's absurd, then I accept the absurdity of saying no. If it's possible, I would be honored to talk. I read it 3 times. It was not the way you write to a board. It was the way you write to the part of yourself you're trying to keep. I sent it. My phone buzzed a minute later with a message from the CEO. Not the chair. Not the recruiter. "You free to talk?" I called him. He said, "I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I don't remember the last time I didn't break a promise to my wife. So let me start by saying I respect your email." My heart did a small stupid thing, hope. He went on. "Let me also say the board won't like it. They'll call it unorthodox. They'll call it soft. But the board is not your son. And the board won't visit you in a hospital if you have a heart attack at 60. I can advocate if you're serious about taking the job under those terms." "I am." "Then be prepared to hear no," he said. "And if you hear yes, be prepared to enforce your boundaries like a security guard with a list." I slept that night like someone who has made an enemy in the right direction. Monday again. Monday arrived with the kind of sun that announces a truce. At 10, the chair called. Her voice was professional and slightly colder, as if weather had moved in between us. "We appreciate your candor," she said, which is a sentence that always precedes a door closing. "We are not in the habit of tailoring roles to personal schedules." She paused, as if to let me feel the shape of that sentence. "That said, your email has made an impression. The CEO has advocated strongly. I have authority to offer you the role with the following accommodations. A cap on travel, 2 evenings a week protected. Not Wednesdays," she added, and there was a small, petty pleasure in the denial. "We expect you to be present for crises. We expect you to be present." "Of course," I said. I could take this as victory or as the kind of compromise that kills you slowly. I thought about Jonah asleep on my couch, a textbook smelling like markers and paper. I thought about the way I felt at the piano when the right hand finally decided to trust the left. "I need Wednesdays," I said, "because sometimes the small thing is the big thing in disguise. I need that specific day." Silence traveled the wire like a weather front. "That is not how we do things," she said. "Then perhaps I'm not your guy," I replied. I heard my own heartbeat, and it sounded like someone learning a new instrument. She exhaled. "You are very good at this, Daniel." "At what?" "At holding leverage." "I'm trying to hold a life." I swallowed. "I understand if that's inconvenient." Another pause. "I will call you back." I waited. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I walked to the window and watched a man parallel park with the intensity of a surgeon. I sat at the piano and played until the room felt safe. When the phone rang, I let it ring once and then answered. The chair said, with a crispness that translated to approval only if you wanted it to, "Wednesdays." "Thank you," I said like a person receiving parole. "We expect results," she said, which is the only true rule of employment. After I hung up, I didn't cheer. I didn't fist pump or text anyone with a fireworks emoji. I stood and looked at the piano and then at the couch where Jonah had fallen asleep on Saturday, and at the hallway where the harbor photograph now sulked, and then I sat down because sitting is sometimes an act of faith. I played the motif from the piece we had written, the one that sounded like me asking and him refusing and then answering. When my phone vibrated with emails about press releases and onboarding schedules and the CFO suggested talking points, I let it. At 4, I texted Jonah, "You want to come by? I have news." He wrote, "Yeah, but I got practice later." "I know," I wrote. "Wednesdays." He sent a question mark and then, "Okay, old man." That night, he came over with the hesitancy of someone visiting a place that had recently changed its rules. I told him the terms. He listened, tapping a drumstick against his knee in a complicated rhythm that might have been anxiety or joy. "You did that," he said, as if I had moved a building with a spoon. "I did that with the help of a guy who knows what regret sounds like," I said, thinking of the CEO's late-night confession. "Are you happy?" Jonah asked. "I'm not happy," I said, and he rolled his eyes. "I'm serious. I'm scared," I admitted, and relieved, and proud, and worried that I just painted a target on my back. "And also happy." He nodded, as if that complexity reassured him. "Can we play?" We played. We played the way you practice mercy, with repetition and small corrections. We argued about tempo the way citizens argue about policy. We ate Chinese food out of boxes and left the boxes open on the table because we were certain we would keep returning. Before he left, he stood in the doorway with his backpack on one shoulder and said, almost shy, "You were good at the club." "You too," I said, "especially when you looked like you wanted to throw a stick at me." "That's my thing," he said and grinned. After the door closed behind him, the apartment was quiet in a way that felt earned. I opened my laptop and waded back into logistics, charts, org structures, emails that required paragraphs and courage. I wrote a note to my team that didn't say what was happening yet, but prepared them to believe they could survive me either way. I wrote a note to my ex-wife that said only thank you for letting me have Wednesdays, and she replied with a heart I pretended not to see. A week later, turns out the life you choose doesn't arrive like a package. It shows up in installments and sometimes in the wrong color. I became the CEO with a clause that made people nudge each other in meetings and whisper, "He thinks he's special." Which was fine because I am special to the only person who gets to call me dad. The board didn't punish me. They gave me more money so that when I said no to a third trip to Singapore that month, I could feel the weight of my decision in cash. I learned to delegate like a person finally admitting he had two hands and only one life. I wrote a policy that said no emails after 10 unless a warehouse was on fire. People resented it. People thanked me. On Wednesdays, I left at 6 as if the building were on fire. Some weeks, a crisis tried to argue with me. Sometimes it won. More often, I treated it like a bully and kept walking. Jonah and I made a rule. If I was going to miss, I had to tell him by noon. If I missed twice in a row, there had to be cake. We learned 3 standards together and wrote 2 originals that our friends did not ask us to play but tolerated beautifully. We fought once in a while. He told me to stop using metaphors when I was trying to apologize. I told him to stop pretending sarcasm was the same as honesty. We got better at stopping. I thought that choosing Wednesdays would make me a different man. It did not. It made me this man more often. On the 1-month anniversary of the offer, which I privately celebrated as if I were married to a person named Agreement, we went back to the club with the stickered door. The drummer recognized us. The bartender said, "Soda?" To Jonah, as if he were an adult patron he'd served for years. We played our song, the one we never named so that it could keep changing. When we finished, I looked at my son and he looked at me. It's tempting to say we understood each other fully in that look. We did not. But we understood each other more, which, if you have ever tried to build a life from pieces you dropped on the way to a corner office, is almost the entire miracle. On the way home, Jonah asked if I still wanted the job the way I wanted it in the conference room with the consultant slides and the envelope sitting on the table like a promise and a threat. "I want it differently," I said. "How?" "I want it like a song I love but am willing to stop playing if you say you're tired." He laughed and called me corny. I accepted the verdict. At home, after he'd left, I took the harbor photograph down from the hallway and leaned it against the wall in the living room. I put it beside the piano. I didn't know if the two belonged together. I didn't know if I would sell the photograph or hang it back up when the wall missed it. I sat and played the piece that had become our ongoing question. The room felt like it had a heartbeat. I thought about success and how it can be a quiet thing if you let it. The chair sent me a note that night with a line I reread twice. "Thank you for insisting on being human," it said. "It is inconvenient. It is also instructive." I smiled. I did not reply, because sometimes gratitude doesn't need a recipient. Before I went to bed, I set the metronome on the piano and let it tick for a minute in the dark. The tempo was slow, the kind that forces you to listen to spaces. I thought about my father scrubbing pots on his own Saturdays, about the way he hummed when he didn't know he was humming, about how he once told me that every promise starts as a beat and stays a beat until you turn it into a song. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without the feeling that I'd forgotten something important. If I had, it could tell me its name tomorrow.